This is all that's left from an old cardigan that I had a while ago. The cardigan went out of style, but the yarn was so lovely that I decided to unravel the cardigan and reuse the yarn. And I kept all these little pieces as a memento. This is a snap button that was originally used for the cardigan. It had only one button. I think it holds very well, so I might reuse it for some other project in the future. I also kept all the tags. So we can see that it was made by Zara. And I like the contents of the yarn. It has 23% of wool and 23% of mohair. I thought it was a good value and worth saving and reusing. And these are some other tags with washing instructions and some other information. So this is all the yarn that's left after reusing it. This yarn is thick and thin. It is very heavily textured and it's very soft and silky to the touch. Very pleasant. It does not peel, does not shed, and it wears like iron. The original cardigan was made with the yarn held double, something like this, and at first I had no idea. I thought it was just some bulky yarn with a bit of texture. But then it turned out that it was actually made of 2 strands, and it's way more textured than I thought, which made it even more interesting. So that's all that is left, little bits. I will still keep them because I might reuse them in the future, maybe for some striping or embroidery. I also might reuse the button because it's pretty strong, holds well, and I like the color, so we'll see. If you'd like to find out which store-bought knits you can unravel to reuse the yarn, then I invite you to follow this link and watch the video. So I unraveled my old cardigan, washed the yarn, rewound it, and reused it to make a sweater. I designed it with extra long sleeves. It also has an extra long neck ribbing for warmth, and I made it slightly oversized with an extra long raglan line, so I can wear a t-shirt underneath. I decided to make it level with my husband's vest, which I often borrow. So instead of making the sweater longer, I used more yarn to make extra long sleeves and neck ribbing. Because the sweater was worked top down, I was able to work on several areas at the same time to make sure that I have enough yarn for everything. And I used up almost all the yarn, just have a few little bits left. This is the beginning of the sweater. I started with a provisional cast on and then worked the sweater down in the round seamless, then picked up the stitches at the neck and worked the ribbing. Here the neck rib is almost finished, but I am still keeping the yarn on hold like this because I'm not sure how much yarn I'll have for other parts of the sweater, so if I have enough, I'll make the rib a little longer and then bind off. This is how my raglan lines look. They look like 2 knit stitch columns going up, but in fact, because the sweater was worked top down, it's a single knit stitch column going down. And the illusion was made by the way I was making my increases. The idea was to have the raglan lines looking like it's 2 knit stitch columns going up, and then they would flow into the 2 knit stitch columns of the rib. This is the finished look. The 2 knit stitch columns of the raglan line are flowing into the 2 knit stitch columns of the rib. And I repeated this on all four sides. Each raglan line continues as two columns of the rib. This is the back of the sweater, the two raglan lines, the first one, and this is the last raglan line. To shape the neck opening, I used German short rows at the front and also just a couple of short rows at the back. After I removed the provisional cast-on row, I did a chain bind off, then picked up the stitches and worked the rib. So there is a seam, but it's not too bulky, and it is stabilizing the neck opening. It's a little bit stretchy, but not too much. So it gives in a little bit like this. But without this stabilizing effect, because the rib is so super stretchy, the neck opening would lose its shape. Because the yarn is so super textured, I decided not to use my favorite sewn bind off method, and instead I used a chain bind off, alternating the knit and purl stitches, and it helped to create a neater edge. So the knit stitches I bound off knitwise and the purl stitches purlwise. Here it probably shows a little better. Right at the top I have 2 knit stitches followed by 2 purl stitches and then 2 knit stitches and so on. So there is no visible rim. For the circumference of the neck opening, I measured and calculated the number of stitches so that my neck opening would fit snugly around my lower face, because I also wanted to wear it as a cowl. And because the chain bind off is not really stretchy, I tried and tested several different hook sizes to make sure that my head will go through and that the edge looks neat. And this is how I wear it. I can either fold it like this, just like a regular sweater, and I can also tuck it in like this. And actually I wear it like this more often. I like the look. It looks a little bit unusual. So it goes all the way up to my ears, which is very nice because in the winter I don't have to wear a scarf. The gauge in stockinette stitch was 16 stitches and 20 rounds in 10 centimeters, using a 4.5 millimeter or US 7 needle. I started with a 4 millimeter hook for the provisional cast-on row. And then I switched to a 4.5 millimeter or US 7 needle for the entire sweater, for the body and for the sleeves. And then after I removed the provisional cast-on row, for the neck opening, I worked 1 knit stitch round with a 4 millimeter needle or US 6. And after that, I used a 4 millimeter hook for the chain bind off. Then I switched to a 2.75 millimeter or US 2 needle that I used for the entire neck ribbing. And for the ribbing of the sleeves and the bottom of the sweater. My swatch showed that this way the size of the rib stitches would be close to the size of the stitches of the body of the sweater, and I thought it looked very nice that the knit stitches of the body of the sweater or of the sleeves appear to sort of flow into the knit stitch columns of the rib. Here I have the same effect. The knit stitches of the front of the sweater flow into the knit stitches of the neck rib, and they appear to be of the same size, which is achieved by using two dramatically different needle sizes. And I finished the rib everywhere with a 3.5mm hook. So I used it for the collar, the cuffs, and for the bottom of the sweater. I used a whole bunch of needle and hook sizes. This was all based on the results of the swatching, which I'm trying to make a habit of doing. It really helps. One more important detail. Because the gauge of the body of the sweater and of the rib were so different, I had to add a lot of extra stitches to the rib, and also I had to plan the repeat: 2 knit stitches, 2 purl stitches, 2 knit stitches, 2 purl stitches, and so on, so that when I approach the raglan line, I would have 2 knit stitches followed by 2 purl stitches, and then 2 knit stitches that would follow the raglan line. And the same I would have to do at every raglan line, so that all the columns flow one into the other. My raglan line is extra long because I wanted my sweater to be a bit oversized. The increases were custom calculated to fit my body shape. They are at different intervals for the front, the back, and for the sleeves. This is the underarm. That's the raglan line ending here. I used the provisional method of casting on the stitches for the underarm. So it's a seamless underarm. And my raglan line, because it's just one stitch raglan line, I added those raglan line stitches to the body. And the same on the other side. That's the other underarm. Those are again the raglan lines ending here, and the seamless underarm. And for the sleeve, I made some decreasing, leaving 2 central stitches. So I was decreasing around 2 central stitches. I turned my sweater inside out, and this is how it looks. I only have one seam at the neck, and it looks quite fun. I like it. I might even wear it inside out. It has sort of a rustic look. It might go well with some very distressed jeans. I think that bouclé yarn also looks pretty on the wrong side or in reverse stockinette. The bouclé bumps look kind of scattered all over. And that's how the underarm looks on the wrong side. And this is one of the sleeves, and the rib looks the same on the right and on the wrong sides. The body of the sweater was worked straight, no increasing or decreasing. And I worked the rib the same way here as for the sleeves. In this part of the video, I'll share some knitting tips and tricks. I'll be making a small sample where I'll show the nuances of knitting the raglan line, ribbing, casting on and binding off, and which needle and hook sizes I used where and for what purpose. I will use the gray cotton yarn for the provisional casting on, and then the white cotton for the main part of the sweater. I like to use the cotton yarn for the provisional casting on in general because it is smooth, non-staining, non-shedding, and it is very easy to remove. So first I'm going to make a slip knot. This is how I hold the yarn. I'm used to this, but of course everybody can do it their own way. So my yarn tail is here under the thumb and the working yarn is over the index finger. I place my hook under the tail over the working yarn and pull through. And this is the first chain. Now I'm taking my main needle, that's the needle size that I would use for the body of the sweater, and place the yarn so that the yarn tail is staying alongside the needle and the working yarn is behind the needle. And then the hook goes under the working yarn and I pull the yarn through the first chain. Place the working yarn behind the needle and again the hook under the yarn, pull through the chain. So I have 2 stitches. Working yarn behind the needle, the hook goes under the yarn, pull through. I have another stitch. Working yarn again behind the needle, hook under the yarn, pull through, and I have 4 stitches. Again, working yarn behind the needle, hook under the yarn, pull through, and so on. So I have enough stitches here on my needle for my sample, and now I'm going to secure the yarn. So I can just pull the yarn through the last stitch like this and pull it out a bit and cut the yarn. And remove the rest of the yarn, so I have my provisional cast on row. Now I will add the main colored yarn and work the knit stitches. Because of the method of the increases that I used for my sweater, it was necessary to first knit 2 regular knit stitch rounds. So for the sample, I made 2 regular rows of knit stitches. I'm placing these 2 yellow markers to the left and to the right of a single knit stitch. This would be my single stitch raglan line. And then when I work on my sweater, I was making an increase before a marker and after a marker. Now in my sweater, this would be my 3rd knit stitch round, and I will knit all the way up to the first yellow marker. This is the yellow marker. I knit the last stitch before the marker, and then I insert the left needle tip back to front under the left leg into the stitch of the row below and knit into that loop. Move the marker onto the right needle tip, knit the regular stitch of the raglan line, move the second marker onto the right tip, and here I do the reverse. With the right tip, I insert back to front into the stitch below, place it onto the left needle tip, and knit into that loop. And then knit the knit stitch and knit all the remaining stitches. So I made my first 2 increases. In the sweater, for the first several rounds, I was making my increases in every second round. I will show it one more time. Here again, I knit the last stitch before the yellow marker, and then insert the left hand needle tip back to front into the stitch in the row below and knit into that stitch. Move the marker onto the right tip, knit the regular stitch of the raglan line, move another marker onto the right tip, and then back to front into the stitch of the row below, place it onto the left tip and knit into that loop. Knit the knit stitch and again knit all the knit stitches. Here I made a bigger sample and it looks like I have 2 knit stitch columns, while in fact it's a single stitch raglan line, and that's the column created by 1 stitch surrounded by 2 markers. I will now undo the provisional cast on row and then pick up the stitches and show how I did the transition between the body of the sweater and the rib. I'm undoing the knot, and then I will carefully remove the yarn tail and free my first stitch. That's my first stitch here, and then I continue picking up all the stitches. I'm using here a 4mm needle size versus 4.5mm that I used for the body of the sweater, because I will knit 1 knit stitch round before doing the chain bind off. And this will help to make a neater transition between the body of the sweater and the rib. So in the sweater, after 1 regular knit stitch round, I did the regular chain bind off, like this. Before working the rib, I will pick up stitches from every stitch of the last knit stitch row, and I now switched to a 2.75mm needle. This is the same needle size that I'm going to use for the rib. The next step is probably the most interesting. It's the rib. The gauge of the rib and the body of the sweater were so different that I had to add a lot of extra stitches to the rib to make it look good. I also had to plan the repeat so that at the raglan lines I would have 2 knit stitches. This is how I planned it. I would have 2 knit stitches here, then 1 purl stitch, 1 KFB, 1 knit stitch, 1 purl stitch, 1 KFB, 1 knit stitch, and so on. So it goes like this. I knit a stitch, I knit the following stitch, and then knit into the same stitch through the back loop, like this. So I have 2 knit stitches and 1 purl stitch. Then I purl a stitch. Now I have 2 knit stitches and 2 purl stitches. Knit the following stitch, knit another stitch, and knit into the same stitch through the back loop, like this. Make a purl stitch. So I have 2 knits, 2 purls, 2 knits, 2 purls, and now I am at my raglan line. So I knit 2 stitches. I will purl the following 2 stitches. Again, knit 1 stitch, knit the following stitch, and knit through the back loop, like this, and make a purl stitch. This is how it looks. This is the result. 2 knits, 2 purls, 2 knits, 2 purls, and at my raglan line I have 2 knit stitches, and then 2 purls, 2 knits, 2 purls, and so on. I'll knit some more and show you how it looks. Here I have the knit stitch columns of the rib and the raglan line stitches aligned, and the increases were made here. They look just like normal purl stitches, very organic, and the knit stitch columns of the rib flow from the knit stitch columns of the body, and they are of the similar size. My last step was a chain bind off, and I used a 3.5mm hook. To make this bind off as invisible as possible, I worked each knit stitch knitwise or from left to right, like this, and each purl stitch from right to left or purlwise, like this. And if you like, you can follow a link that I will place here, and you can watch another video that I have on the channel where I show how to do this jogless in the round. This is how the bind of edge looks. The last stitches correspond to the stitches of the columns, and there is no rim. And I used the same bind off method for the cuffs and for the bottom of the sweater. So it looks like this, just like a chain. And I also increased the number of stitches for the rib everywhere to prevent it from gathering, to make it look flat, because I prefer this look. The sweater did not change much after washing, just became a bit smoother. One other thing worth mentioning is that items made of the bouclé yarn tend to expand a bit after wearing, so my sweater has become a bit roomier than right after it was made. But I like my sweaters oversized anyways, so it's all good. That's it. I thought this information was worth sharing, and I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Have a pleasant time knitting, and I will see you in the next one.